Okay, sounds good. All right, everyone, welcome. So why don't we, I think everybody is sort of familiar with one another to some extent, but does the city team want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce the consultant team and get us started?
Sure. Why don't we start with, I don't know if it's everybody's box layout is going to be different, so I can't say we start top left because everybody's top left is probably going to be different.
I can call people out.
There you go. That's probably
So,
best.
Steve, why don't you get us started, and then I'll circulate around from you.
Sure. Steve Kleppen with Planning and Zoning.
Perfect. And Laura?
Sure. Laura Kenny, Planning and Zoning.
Great, thank you. Michelle?
Michelle, Planning and Zoning.
Great. John Romano?
Yeah, John Romano, Chairman of Harbor Management Commission.
Tammy Lingalis?
Yes, hi, Tammy Langalis. I'm on the Planning Commission, volunteer, not City of Norwalk.
Thank you. And Louis or Lou Shulman?
Chairman of the Zoning Commission.
And do you prefer Louis or Lou?
I'll answer either.
Okay, fair. Steve Bartush?
Shellfish Commission, Mayor's Water Quality Committee.
Great. And please, anyone feel free to correct me if I get your name wrong. Carly Kramer?
Carly Kramer, Redevelopment Agency for Norwalk.
John Keeds?
Kites, how are
Kites.
you all? No problem. John Kites, City Council, Chair of the Planning Committee. Sorry, I'm in the car en route to the house. So
All good, thank you. And Diana?
Hi, I'm Diana Palmintero. I'm taking the minutes for the meeting.
Great, thank you. And I think Sabrina is our final.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Director of Business Development and Tourism for the City of Norwalk.
Great, thank you. All right, well, great to meet all of you. My name is Zoe Mueller. Oh, we just had Galen join, I think. Hi there, Galen. Do you want to introduce yourself? I think most people probably know you, but please feel free. Just unmute yourself. Perfect.
My name's Galen Wells, and I'm on the Zoning Commission. Very interested in this. It sounds like it'll be a good experience for all of us.
Absolutely. Welcome. Thank you. And my name's Zoe Mueller. I'm the project manager for the consultant team. My background is as a planner, and that's sort of my role on this project. I'll be joined a little bit later on tonight by the principal in our firm that's overseeing this effort with me. His name is Tim Love. His background is in both architecture and urban planning. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing our slides and just walk us through just some introductory context, and then we can get into discussion. Right. So our agenda today, we're going to start out just giving you guys an overview of the origins and purpose that we have in mind for this plan. And then we'll walk you through the process, schedule, and steering committee role, sort of what we're hoping to work with you guys on. And then we'll give an overview of the study area and some of our initial analysis, bearing in mind that there's more analysis to come, and we certainly welcome any feedback or fact checking on what we've done so far. Initial engagement takeaways, we've done quite a bit of stakeholder engagement so far, and so we'll share with you some of the things that are emerging from that engagement. And that's when we're hoping that we'll be able to have a little bit of a discussion with you all about a little bit of some of the sort of themes, some of the things that are coming up, and just sort of make sure that we're capturing some of the key input to sort of shape the priorities and the key issues that the planning process is going to address. And then we'll kind of close out with next steps, so you know what's coming in the coming months, and finally a public comment period for those that are joining and sort of listening to this session. So in terms of origins and purpose, oh, actually, let me skip back 1 second. I just wanted to offer, since Two of our team members aren't going to be joining today. I also wanted to introduce them just so you know that there's kind of a broader team that we're pulling from. So Will Cohen is with UTEAL, same firm as me and Tim. He's a specialist in sort of online engagement work, as well as economic analysis and spatial analysis. So he's great with sort of complex data sets and will really help support us in that way. Kevin Hively is our economic development subconsultant. He'll be supporting us with sort of more detailed economic analysis, doing follow-up with sort of broader national data sets, and helping us to really get the info we need to answer any questions that come up in this process related to sort of economic development goals. Okay. So with that, I want to jump back to just share, I think most of you know this and some of you were involved in this previous study, but this waterfront, industrial waterfront land use study really emerged from the Norwalk Industrial Zone study. This study was citywide. The intention of that study was to really simplify and streamline the industrial zoning in the city, and also to really prepare it for sort of how industry is changing. There's a lot of cities all over the US that are sort of struggling with this now, which is many of the industrial uses our zoning was designed for are no longer really the primary uses in these zones. And so it makes sense to sort of update it so that it's really recognizing the full range of modern industrial uses, and that the dimensional standards and things like that are all well aligned so that these types of uses can actually get through the permitting process and sort of be welcomed into the city in a way that makes sense for the city. So the result of that was these kind of 4 categories that sort of consolidated what was sort of 14 different zones. So this is what's kind of moving through the city planning process now. It basically goes from higher intensity heavy industrial through mixed use, both mixed use with heavy industrial and mixed use with light industrial, and then finally a more kind of all-encompassing mixed-use artisan district that allows for some of the lowest impact industrial uses to be intermingled with other uses in a way that's mutually beneficial. So with that, sort of knowing that that is sort of the background context, we wanted to, with this plan, really give the waterfront its due. It really requires detailed studies. It has some more sort of complex, different influences that require sort of more subtle or more complex land use policy than is needed elsewhere in the city. So this is really, this study helps to give us the time and the analysis needed to sort of make good recommendations for the waterfront. Ultimately, what we're hoping to do with this is to make zoning recommendations. But before getting to that point, we really need to develop with you and with the broader public a balanced vision for the waterfront that has broad support, that isn't just representing one stakeholder group or one vision. We also are ultimately then going to sort of fold that into potential policy change. So that's both rezoning, and you'll see, we've been collaborating with the Harbor Management Commission to sort of understand what they've done so far. They have a great base to sort of for us to build from. So if there's anything that comes up through this process that makes sense to incorporate into the harbor management plan, we'll work with this body to do so. And then finally, there's a couple of kind of slightly less policy goals, which is also to inform economic development strategy and initiatives. So things that are slightly more programmatic, as well as identifying any capital projects and potential funding sources that might be able to move forward specific projects or sort of initiatives. There's also, we wanted to give a little bit of clarity on environmental components of the plan. We take the sort of environmental impact of land use very seriously. That being said, this is not specifically sort of like an ecological or environmental planning process, but we will certainly be taking into account high risk and sort of high sensitivity areas, thinking about dredging, risk reward, sort of coming up with a framework for that based on what we're hearing from people so that we understand sort of how the use of the water is then rippling through to the sort of land side land use impacts. thinking about capital projects that might improve water quality, as well as sort of incorporating best practices in zoning standards that would help to minimize stormwater runoff and also support water quality. So this is sort of just to give you a sense of the scope of when we talk about environmental analysis for this plan, that's what we're talking about. Obviously, there's much more that can be done, but that'll sort of happen outside of this planning process.
Zoe?
Yeah.
When you showed the different colored areas, is that what is existing now? The light industrial, commercial, industrial, blah, 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 and then on this map here?
So this is actually, this is not yet in zoning. So this is the proposal that came out of the Norwalk Industrial Zone study. So the current zoning has what you're seeing here in the sort of colors on this map. Currently, those are many different zones with overlapping sort of allowable uses. So this is a proposed sort of simplification and modernization of the zoning, but it is not the zoning that is in place right now.
Okay, because it seemed to be glaring that the marine use zone was not incorporated in this.
Absolutely. So that's actually intentional because this process now, what we're working with you on in this planning process is the process that's going to help us understand what's sort of the preferred land use framework for the water, which includes preserving existing industrial uses along the waterfront. So that portion of the map is blank, not because we're saying there should be no industrial zoning there, but because we knew that further study was needed with all of the sort of waterfront specific stakeholders to be able to make sort of reliable and appropriate recommendations for the waterfront. So
yeah, and it's Tim Love
to
from
be
UT, and I was
determined.
a little bit late, but I just want to put that another way, John, which is originally that outline that you see in black, which is our current scope of this study,
Right.
wasn't our scope of work for the industrial district study. And we realized that we weren't talking to the right stakeholders to put enough intelligence on that. So that's actually why Steve and his team decided to pull that boundary area out of the scope of the industrial study to find resources to really focus on the waterfront. That's another way to put it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. And it should be more or less a standalone. I mean,
Yes.
I'm pretty sure what you did before, now we're drilling it.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thought is that sort of this framework that you see on the slide here, we want to sort of carry that sort of broader conceptual framework forward, but to really customize it to the waterfront and think about what specific needs the waterfront has. Okay, so in terms of process and schedule, we are in November here. You can see that we've had sort of a couple months of getting to know Norwalk, of doing some sort of focused stakeholder interviews. We did come to Norwalk in August at the very end of the month to do an in-person tour and to hear from a couple of stakeholders to help us get oriented. And we're now sort of in the existing conditions analysis period. So towards the beginning of December, we'll be sharing a sort of compiled existing conditions analysis, some of which we're going to be sharing with you today. But that will be sort of the baseline that we use then to come up with 3 different scenarios for what the land use framework along the waterfront could look like. And these scenarios will be used as a way to continue to have discussions. So they're not necessarily envisioned as the final recommendations. There are 3 alternatives for us to all sort of consider together and evaluate and sort of mix and match so that we have something that's sort of useful to focus our discussions. But they're really, it's still very much in the deciding process. So that's kind of the next phase of work is going to be around developing these scenarios, evaluating them together, talking about those trade-offs and alternatives, both with this steering committee body and also with the public. So starting in January, most likely kind of late January, we'll be having our first public meeting for the process. At that point, we will have those scenarios to share with the public to get that feedback. And we'll also be sharing with the public some of the existing conditions analysis that led to those scenarios. And then coming around April, we'll be sort of composing from those 3 scenarios a sort of a composite preferred scenario to move forward with and to sort of detail out as the sort of final plan recommendation. So that public meeting number 2, which we're targeting for April, that would be when we're sort of trying to solidify those recommendations. And then between April and May, really just getting all of the details, crossing our T's, dotting our I's, making it all sort of ready to move into policy and implementation. In terms of this body, you can see on the right sort of a list of all of the individuals that are members of this committee. This is sort of composed to try and represent a lot of the key both decision makers, but also sort of implementation partners and people that just know Norwalk's harbor really well, so that we're getting some of that continual feedback from you all as we're starting to develop our recommendations. And more specifically, what we're really looking for you to help us with is to advise on key issues and priorities that you think the plan should address, to help us a little bit with coordination and alignment with any existing policies, as well as ongoing or future projects and initiatives that you might be aware of. We also, not to sort of put you all as community organizers necessarily, but we hope that you will sort of share with your networks what you're working on in this process and sort of help to keep people aware of the process and sort of just have that sort of communication line so that people, there's a little bit of a boost in participation and understanding with key stakeholders, agencies, and members of the public. We'll obviously be leading that charge and sort of putting all that infrastructure in place, but it helps to have a couple of people boosting the sort of the discussion around these issues. And then finally, especially as we sort of get further along in the process, we'll really be looking to you to help review and provide constructive feedback on either our proposed process or some of our initial findings, as well as interim deliverables and final recommendations. So really being sort of a sounding board to tell us if you think we're on track or if you think that adjustments need to be made so that we can sort of, put our best foot forward. Any questions on that before I keep moving? Okay. And we'll have time for discussion later, but just wanted to pause there since it's important. Sorry. So now I'll just go through a couple of base maps to sort of get us oriented and share with you some of the initial sort of layers that we're looking at. This is sort of to help orient you to sort of where we're focusing our attentions. So if you sort of follow along this black dashed line, that's our study area boundary. This is designed based on sort of the current zoning categories as well as sort of natural boundaries. So we're mostly looking at the from the waterfront, from the water's edge to approximately the first public road in most cases. So it's really those sort of parcels that are straddling between the water and the road network. And then we're also going to be looking, so those dark blue parcels are really our primary focus. You'll see that our study area includes several public parks. We have no intentions of changing the land use for those parks, but we do want to make sure that we're considering those public uses in relationship to the uses immediately adjacent to them, so that there's a little bit of sort of coordination and synergy there with the land use framework. And then finally, if you look at the light blue that's sort of around the edges of the study area, we aren't intending to make any recommendations for land use policy in those areas. Many of them were covered by the industrial zone study that's just been completed. Or rather that we're sort of incorporating the final comments on now. But we do want to include them in this as context. So they're obviously affected by any changes that we would propose in the dark blue and should be coordinated with those. So it's really to make clear that we're not just going to ignore things right outside the boundary. We're going to consider that relationship. Another important element to sort of look at, this is, the area that our study area encompasses is predominantly commercial and industrial. There is some residential, but it does mean that in a lot of cases, we're thinking about the people and communities that live just outside of this study area that would be relevant to sort of understand their relationship to the study area. And so this is just to sort of contextualize. People from all over the county are making use of the amenities and the assets along this waterfront, certainly in some cases even further afield than Fairfield County. This is also a significant sort of resource and amenity for the city of Norwalk. So thinking about, who's in the city of Norwalk and how are they making use of the waterfront, as well as the study area itself. So the census tracts that immediately surround our study area, who lives there. And it's just significant to note that the study area, as might be expected, does have higher poverty rate, higher minority, and more people for whom English is a second language or for whom they are not proficient in English. So what this means is this is, in some cases, is sort of a classic environmental justice community in which we have a lot of higher impact land uses and people that have, higher vulnerability or more kind of risk factors that, we need to consider. So that's just something to sort of contextual for the planning process. Another element is this is really the waterfront is really an economic engine for the city, and it's a something that draws people from all over. So if you look on the left map, this shows for people that work in Norwalk, where do they live? So you can see that it's pulling from all over the region really into the sort of the core of Norwalk. And then on the flip side, on the right, you can see for those that live in Norwalk, where are they working? And you can see that it sort of follows along strings, mostly along the highways and in some cases along the rail corridors. So you can see that there's sort of a push-pull dynamic there. In our study area in particular, one of the things that we've certainly noticed when we were on site, but in our mapping as well, is this is an incredibly diverse, multifaceted area. There is no one Norwalk waterfront. This is like an incredibly sort of rich environment of lots of different uses and lots of different sort of individual characters along the waterfront. So this slide is mostly to sort of recognize that. And this is part of the challenge, but also the strength of the waterfront, that it encompasses this range of uses. And this is showing, to your question earlier, John, this is showing the existing zoning districts. And then I think some of you have seen this already, but just sort of to drive that point home, this is really, an active industrial waterfront. This is not like an industrial waterfront of the past. There's active loading happening. The waterfront is being used for marine dependent industrial uses. And we have, everything from institutional and tourism to recreation to residential, open space, sort of marine commercial. So this is really a rich and diverse waterfront. And then just in context, this is sort of the existing zoning framework. And then by comparison, the proposed zoning framework with these different use classifications that go from heavier to sort of lightest and sort of most compatible with residential. And you can see here that, while there isn't residential really within our study area for the most part, there is significant sort of contact with residential communities right adjacent to it. So certainly still an important part of the planning process and who we need to be speaking with. In terms of within the study area, the ownership, there is actually quite a bit of public ownership for a sort of developed waterfront like this one. So you can see the sort of the park system as well as the sort of public services. And then also in this sort of teal color, you can see public right-of-way as well as the taxing districts. So there's quite a bit of an interesting mix of ownership here, but certainly still predominantly private ownership along the waterfront. In terms of open space, this is showing both public and private, but only showing sort of land that does really have significant public access in one way or another. You can see again the sort of the significant open spaces on the water, but then also the school system as well as cemeteries, which often serve as sort of secondary public spaces. And this is important because public access to the waterfront has come up in a lot of conversations, and so just sort of understanding the current state of affairs is helpful. Similarly, in terms of public access, the trail network is an important aspect of that. You can see that the Norwalk River Valley Trail as well as the Harbor Loop Trail both have the intentions of, sorry, that's my dog in the background, have the intentions of sort of closing the loop, but right now they're sort of partially implemented. So you can see the sort of where that's already been completed and where there's still work to be done. You can also see here public parking. Some of these do have a fee for public parking, but they're sort of resources for people to sort of access the waterfront from further afield. And then this is probably the most complex map, and certainly we can you can sort of look at these slides afterwards for more detailed cross-checking and also anything that you notice that's of interest. But this is really just showing like the intensity of use. This is a busy waterfront. There are a lot of people actively using this area, and the navigational channel is important because that is the area that is maintained at a deeper draft. And so it's an important shared infrastructure really for all of both the industrial users, the recreational boating, the marinas, but also the rowing clubs, the ferry. And so this is sort of a shared issue that's come up in a lot of our conversations is the issue of dredging. And so you can see in orange some of the areas that have come up so far in conversations with stakeholders that do tend to accumulate silt and sort of are problem areas in terms of dredging and sort of water access. There may be more, so feel free to add to this list. But this is just to sort of make clear this is a densely used waterfront with a lot of different types of uses as well. The other factor that's come up a lot, we'll talk about this later in stakeholder interviews, is the issue of flood resiliency. Certainly along Water Street, we know that there's really sort of regular inundation that interrupts people's operations and also sort of is a cost factor, as well as sort of literal things like blocking roads people can't access the property.
Zoe, good to interrupt for a second. Can you go back to the previous screen? Where you're showing number 3?
Yeah.
Unless I'm not mistaken, that's not St. Anne's.
Number 3, right here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at the wrong 3, the blue 3. Okay, sorry.
All good. No, but you're certainly welcome to fact check us on this. We're still kind of getting our heads around it.
Yeah, this is publicly available information, so I just want to reinforce what Zoe said, to dive into this map and any maps in particular where your on the ground knowledge might be better than what the data says. So
yeah, absolutely.
Will we get these slides? Because I can't really see in detail what the.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll circulate them afterwards. Yeah, this in particular is a dense one, so certainly hard to read on a screen at home.
Yeah, but even the others, I'm on my screen, I really am having trouble really seeing exactly where things are. But if I had it in front of me.
Yes, we'll definitely circulate afterwards, and maybe next time adjust our font sizes and such so it's a little bit easier to read. Apologies. Okay, so then in terms of flood risk, I've just circled in red here a couple of the areas that have come up in our conversations. But certainly this is a shared risk across the entire waterfront and something that everybody's sort of coping with in one way or another, and should be something that the land use policy recognizes and sort of coordinates with. Another sort of related factor to resiliency and flood risk is just the impervious surfaces. So this is 2012 data. So certainly we'll have some areas where things have changed. But you can see here that there's especially in a couple of areas along the waterfront, there's a lot of impervious surface, meaning that there's a lot of runoff, a lot of stormwater runoff that is sort of being handled by water treatment system, and in some cases is also going directly into the water. So this is a kind of a water quality concern, but also a sort of a flooding concern. In terms of sort of capital projects, and this is the last of our mapping slides, there's quite a bit that's sort of underway in the works or things that have been sort of discussed. So there are two sort of complete streets projects that the city has been working on, sort of studying in terms of bike, pedestrian, and vehicular access, as well as transit. There is also for the park system, there's a new citywide master plan for the parks that is sort of underway or is about to be launched. And there's also some individual park plans that are sort of in implementation phases for the Veterans Memorial Park, as well as Oyster Shell Park. There's also, in our conversations with the sort of public service providers, we understand that there's quite a bit of sort of internal facility planning for each of them to sort of optimize the space that they have for the demands that they are meeting. We understand that the wastewater treatment plant is sort of comfortably covers the capacity that's required, but they are looking at how to sort of use their space to its fullest potential. The public works and transfer station are both sort of bursting at the seams from what we understand. So they are, trying to make as good use of the land that they have as they can. And that's something that we'll kind of be working with them to understand at a finer grain moving forward. We also know that the walk bridge, there's expected, repair, restoration, or replacement with to some degree an undetermined timeline, as these big projects tend to have. But whenever that does complete, it will sort of put the property immediately adjacent to it back into sort of the inventory of property that can have an alternate use. So that's something that we'll want to sort of be aware of moving forward, is what the sort of preferred end use of some of that property is. So that's what we're aware of now. There may be some other things in the works, but certainly there's a lot already planned in motion, in implementation phases. So this is again, an active waterfront, lots going on. So with that, we wanted to share with you some of what we've heard so far from our stakeholder interviews. So here you can see kind of who we've talked to so far. We've been really focused on hearing from people who are property and business owners within our study area. So you'll see that, strongly represented here. We've mostly been speaking to people who are property or business owners. And then in addition to that, we've been also doing kind of making our acquaintance with the sort of relevant public agencies, sort of governing bodies, advisory bodies that, have some jurisdiction over aspects of what happens in our study area. So I won't go through every single one here, but what you can see is that there's been quite a bit of activity so far, and we'd certainly welcome introductions to anybody else you think we should be speaking with. Just to sort of summarize it thematically a little bit, you can see here, these are all people that we've spoken with, sort of listed in terms of the institutions or businesses that they represent. So the public agencies, utilities, nonprofits, and institutional, some of the key inner harbor heavy industrial businesses, some representatives from the oystering and marine construction sector, the rowing clubs, marinas, boat clubs, boat dealers, and boat services. And then finally, we've had a lot of conversations with individual developers and property owners along Water Street because it's obviously, a lot of activity there. And so we wanted to really make sure that we understood a bit more about what's going on and what people need and expect. Another thing that's we've just sort of launched is a community mapping activity. So this is more public facing. So looking at, residents in particular, trying to hear more from people about, what they like, what they dislike, ideas that they have, suggestions that they have, things that they'd like us to explore. So The digital version of this map has been up for a couple weeks now, and just on November 8th, the city team started to place these physical boards in at City Hall, as well as some of the libraries and senior centers. And then we're also looking at some school locations as well to see if we can get some in-person input as well. So this starts some of the things that we've been hearing from people so far. So water quality and flood resiliency came up in just about every conversation we had. You know, there's some of the specific things that came up was frequent flooding at high tide in the Water Street area, and that it's not just water, it's also debris as well for storm events. So it's, you know, things being carried inland by the waters. We've heard that there's a need for buffering and stormwater management to improve water quality and stormwater runoff, reduce stormwater runoff. We've also heard some interest in a desire for development guidelines that would sort of help to mitigate some of the, you know, the stormwater runoff, as well as any sort of resiliency related, you know, flood mitigation and sort of best practices there. So that's one theme that's come up so far. Another is a desire for improved recreation and hospitality network in support of the marine commercial that exists already. So thinking about sort of the full experience for somebody who has their, you know, maybe their yacht sort of their home port is here in Norwalk. You know, when they come, what else are they doing here in Norwalk? Is there any way to sort of have a more complete support network that goes beyond the sort of industrial and commercial services for boating, and also thinks about the experience in terms of a visitor or sort of a local that's looking to sort of take advantage of what the city has to offer. So that means thinking about the trails, thinking about improved connections between the boating community and the sort of landside amenities that might support them. It means thinking about the streetscapes in a couple of key locations to think about how they can be sort of more all-encompassing for bikes, pedestrians, just create an enjoyable and connected experience for visitors and local users alike. And there's also, there's a sort of an inherent disconnect between the east side and west side of the river. And so thinking about, are there any ways that we can sort of provide more fluidity between those, the sort of the things that exist on either side of the river?
Are you looking at also public access on street ends? To
Yes.
give
Yes.
the opportunity for more mooring opportunities for people with boats, because all our marinas are full.
Yeah, we've certainly heard that the marinas are sort of, in many cases, bursting at the seams with waiting lists. So I think in terms of this theme that's come up, we're sort of looking at it pretty broadly in terms of, you know, what can we do to sort of both increase access to the waterfront, but also sort of make that more of a network. So it's, you know, not just individual isolated access points, but that there's some sort of connective network that's supporting them. And that might mean literally a trail, or it might just mean thinking more about the streets and the sort of wayfinding, the way that people get between different destinations. And it could certainly include thinking about how to sort of provide more amenities in the places where there is already, you know, literal public access in the form of a public right of way.
Yeah, I think that one of the impediments of mooring is the fact that people need to have a place to put their dinghies, and there's not enough of them. And if we created access points, like at the end of First Street in East Norwalk, next to the South Norwalk Boat Club, these are all public lands that access could be very easily accomplished, and it's worth looking at.
Great, yeah, definitely will. Thank you. One of the other things that's come up that's in some senses an extension of the other, but is also just about regular sort of getting to and from other destinations within the city, is two kind of pinch points in the street network. One at Wall Street and Commerce Street, and the other when sort of Washington Street flows to Seaview Ave, First Street, and Cove Ave, that there's kind of there's a lot of use of those two areas. And so thinking through if there's any way to sort of optimize the street for all of its users, all of its potential users in a way that sort of meets everyone's needs and also sort of creates a sort of more vibrant, place that's perhaps has a bit of beautification as well alongside it. We also heard directly from the sort of city services facilities that there are some sort of targeted needs or opportunities within those sort of publicly held lands. So the waste, I mentioned earlier, the waste transfer station and public works are both at capacity and either need to expand or sort of have some level of sort of reconfiguration within their internal sites to better optimize the space that they do have. We also understand that they are open to ways of incorporating public access, resiliency, and waterfront boating amenities as long as it's not interrupting their operation. So there's some opportunity there for us to sort of think about how best to balance those needs and whether we can sort of achieve multiple things with on one site. So moving on from sort of shared things, some of the things that came up where people had differing opinions or different focuses, different priorities, but that sort of came up repeatedly as sort of things that people were interested in this plan addressing. One of them is dredging, which I already kind of mentioned. There's the issue of silt buildup. This is a very heavily used river. Having easy access to the water is important. And so the sort of dredging is something that a lot of stakeholders along the waterfront want to see more regularly or more extensively. But of course, it does also have an environmental impact as it has a significant financial cost. It has potential impacts for the oystering sort of industry. So this is not an easy issue necessarily to get right, but it's something that certainly we're aware of, that we want to think about the right kind of balance. The walk bridge, there's a lot of speculation about what the best end use could be for the staging area land that was taken for the restoration of the bridge. And then more broadly, kind of zooming out, there's been a lot of discussion about sort of the tension between local versus regional economic impact. So the degree to which the existing land use mix is really positively contributing specifically to the local economy in Norwalk and immediately around the waterfront, both in terms of jobs and tax base, versus, when is it that Norwalk really has an existing land use mix that's primarily meeting regional needs, but is maybe doing so at the expense of, local residents or local kind of interests. So we've heard kind of all over the map on that and are, aware that that's part of the tension that this plan sort of needs to engage with and sort of help to resolve. Understanding that sometimes we all do need to do something for the region, but we can maybe get a finer point on that balance. And then the other sort of category of sort of debate or sort of tension that came up is around kind of what, the degree to which people want to see change or not, and what kind of growth do people want to see. So there's a lot of people who, were very clearly anxious about what, whether we were proposing broad changes to the waterfront and wanted to see a clear commitment to preserving what's here. There were also people who really wanted to see, a slightly different sort of celebration of the waterfront, something that sort of brings a more sort of visitor-friendly character. But, what we so far, our sense is that these things aren't necessarily in conflict, but that it's really about thinking about where and when and for whom, and how do we balance these needs, because it's not necessarily one or the other. Another thing that came up is specifically when we talk about growth, economic development, where we want to see more jobs, where we want to see more activity. Different stakeholders that we spoke to had a different vision for what should grow in Norwalk. Some wanted to see the tourism, recreation, and hospitality sector grow. Some wanted to see the marine, commercial, and recreational boating scene grow. Some wanted to make sure that the industrial businesses and the essential public services had room to grow and sort of continue to provide jobs that at a larger number. And also there were some that were interested in seeing residential incorporated in more areas. So there's not really a clear consensus on, what that growth should be. And that's, part of what we hope to tease out, with you and also with the public is, what is that balance and what kind of growth does Norwalk want to see in what direction? So with that, I'd be inclined to open it up to some discussion. We have, just to sort of keep it consolidated so it's easier to reference, we have just a summary of those common themes, so things that were generally shared that came up consistently, and then things that, where there was more tension or more kind of debate, more different opinions on sort of the preferred end result. So I don't know if anybody has any reactions to some of those sort of themes and areas of tension that we've uncovered so far, anything that you think is missing or perspectives that you think haven't been sort of incorporated here so far. Yeah, anything?
So yeah, this is Lou Schulman. I'd just like to make a couple of brief comments, actually related to process.
Sure.
There are three of us from the zoning commission assisting with this study. The city is in the process of combining the planning and zoning commissions into a single commission. So we don't know whether all three of us will be on the new commission. In addition, there's a member of the planning commission on this committee. So there could conceivably be 4 members of the recombined planning and zoning commission working with you on this as we move into the new year. And as the body that is going to have responsibility or some significant responsibility for approving the plans that come out of the study, to some degree, it seems to me as individuals, we need to pull back just a little bit when we get close to the recommendation side of this, so that we're not in the uncomfortable and possibly inappropriate role of prejudging what action a planning and zoning commission might take on these recommendations. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that that insight. Yeah, I think it's important for us to kind of both keep you all, in the loop and sort of as key advisors, knowing sort of the mechanics of the zoning as it exists today and any sort of challenges with the ongoing sort of operations of, the day-to-day of, how the current zoning is functioning. But also absolutely there's a point where we're kind of making that transition where it may make sense to sort of reconsider what the specific relationship is there.
Steve, do you want to add to Zoe's comment? I mean, or maybe not, but it's a good point about ongoing roles and kind of jurisdictional control over where this is all headed.
Sure, I think that'll probably get sorted out in the next couple of weeks, I would expect. And then if we need to make any changes on the fly, I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah, and certainly I think for all of you, if there's a representative that you think should be part of this committee, let us know. We do want to keep this a manageable size and also a kind of an appropriate distribution of different voices. But we can look at that again if it feels like we're missing something or we have an imbalance. Anyone else? Tim, it looks like you have something to say.
No, I'm just wondering to this group if they find it helpful that we've categorized those things that seem to be kind of common goal versus those those areas we've discovered where there might be some differences of opinion about what priorities should be. It's as a planner, it's always a nice point in a process where we kind of uncover that.
John, John Pinto, Norwalk Harbor Management Commission. There's I think from a standpoint from the commission, we're concerned is that there's certain areas that, yeah, certainly can be developed and modified a bit, but there's specific areas that, again, should not be changed. And that deals with the Marine Commercial District. There's a certain need and requirement for industrial regions that should not be modified to the extent that we develop residential areas in this particular, because the DEP does not want, for example, high residential areas in an area that, for example, might have a high flood zone, number one. And the other is that the need for commercial work in and around the harbor is necessary, and that there's certain areas that have to remain constant or development for that particular purpose. And I think this is what I think the commission is certainly concerned about with regard to developers wanting what they want, and what certainly needs to be fairly consistent or steady as far as permanent, let's say, as far as areas that need development for specific regions, not for development with regard to residential areas.
Absolutely. No, I certainly appreciate that. And we'll make sure to, I think we've heard pretty loud and clear throughout the process so far, even just with the stakeholders we've spoken with, the sort of the Water Street area in particular, densely used. There's a high demand for the sort of services that are provided there, and that, it's essential. And I think what we have heard from some property owners is that they would like, on the sort of the Water Street side of their properties, a little bit more flexibility to sort of develop complementary aspects, in that.
Complementary aspect, what does that mean?
So like, let's say if they feel like they have enough space, in the rest of their boat yard to accommodate the sort of the boats that they're servicing, maybe they would like to have a small sandwich shop, or something that's facing, on Water Street, that sort of gives them a front door that's welcoming, that's an amenity for their sort of customers, but that's really taking up a very limited footprint on their property. So that's some of the things that's come up so far. So it's not that we are thinking about a dramatic sort of wholesale revisioning of that area of Norwalk, but more so thinking about, are there ways in which the current zoning is limiting the businesses that are there from developing a sort of a more vibrant version of what they're already doing. So I think that's sort of the spirit of the engagement that we've had so far. And I certainly want to reassure you that we are both sympathetic with and aligned with the idea that certain uses do require sort of policy level protection to make sure that they can continue operating in the way that they are operating.
And more than that, Zoe, those areas should be expanded into more marine use, because I think a lot of the property owners, whether they bought it 20, 30 years ago or inherited it, or, they're looking for an exit strategy. So they've been kind of remiss in their development of the existing properties such as they are today. And the whole goal of the marine commercial use zone was to expand those kind of uses. And there's certainly there's room to do it, and there's a need and a desire to do it. But they're stalling what they're doing, thinking that this is going to be a great exit strategy and a big payday. And, they've owned these properties for a long time, and that shouldn't factor into the overall big picture, because we have a community that needs to be supported in many different ways and expanded. And that's what this zone should be used for, is expansion overall.
I think that through this process, we can provide, I think some of what you're describing is sort of the almost speculative behavior of sort of anticipating like you said, sort of a big payday if land use policy changes, that it opens up different opportunities, right? And I think the intention of this plan is to sort of figure out what the right balance is
You know, on
and
the surface,
provide that clarity so that
Well,
people.
on the
Yeah, go ahead.
surface of things, if you were to put, for example, like you suggested, a sandwich shop, street side, other amenities that'll complement, blend in, because there's a lot of apartments across the street, and development on the west side. So that would, sure, those things would work well as long as you had the proper access and egress into the properties. So that
Yeah,
can-
John, just to weigh in, I think you're making a really good point, which is, are there regulatory tools through zoning in this case that would encourage those complementary uses, but without creating the development value payday that would incentivize all those owners to cash out and get out of there? I think that's, you've hit on the magic question right there. Because, you know, land values drive all kinds of decisions, especially along the waterfront. And so typically, if you remove zoning and it was just highest and best use, property values would go up, and, you know, developers would chase marine uses out of any waterfront in New England, you know. So I think that this is the policy question. And just want to reassure everybody on this call that we're very aware of market dynamics, and in fact, when you're designing revised zoning, you have to imagine what the markets are going to do more than anything else.
Well, Tim, we can go, I'll be able to share my screen, Tim. Because it seems like we're revisiting history. Going back to 1987, Jeff Stedman had put together a series of newspaper articles where the DEP had questioned the rezoning of the Marine Commercial District on the Water Street area back in the late 1980s. And we're trying to find out what the outcome of that particular suit was. We haven't heard, but it set up a foment of activity, certainly, about what was developed in there. And some of the questions you're asking right now, with regard to, let's see, Planning Commission rejects Water Street zone amendments. We have several newspaper articles back in 1988 that have addressed this. The money factor, this is what you just talked about. Questions of who will profit from development stirs troubled waters. So there's certainly, again, you know, a little deja vu with regard to what we're doing now that happened way back when. So DEP,
I'd love to see those articles if you want to send them to
DEP
us.
sues city over waterfront changes. So, you know, this is what we're facing right now, because as I said, there's a certain need for maintaining a commercial marine district.
Right. I think there's no argument here. I think the question is the marine industrial district more sustainable, actually, if there are complementary uses that make those businesses even more successful than they are now, especially legacy business that are making other decisions? So is there a special sauce, right, that actually revitalizes those businesses, or has the legacy businesses where the existing ownership is making decisions, maybe make other decisions about to the next generation to continue running the businesses because they can open a restaurant, or they can do X, or they can do Y, without creating an incentive for them to sell outright because speculative developers think the path to doing a denser mixed use residential development is easier to do. And I think that in a way, the path to achieving, I think, what a lot of people in this meeting want to achieve is tinkering with the allowable uses, but within fixed densities enough that a revitalization is actually possible, versus some of these looking like the back lot of, you know, a business that isn't into it so much. So that's, and I think that this is precisely the kind of sounding board to see if the policy tools we think about seem right to you.
Well, it'll be good to know the history. Now, Zoe, I can send these newspaper articles to you, and if we can disseminate it to the entire members of the committee, that would be very helpful, because as I said, it's important for us to know the history so don't we repeat it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it'd be wonderful to see kind of what the issues were that were coming up at that time. I think that it's
Well,
natural.
we're talking about them right now. And those
Yeah.
are described in newspaper articles back when, between the zoning board and the commercial development and the DEP. So
Yeah.
I'll send those over to you, and we can certainly take a look at them. And plus, the Harbor Commission has put together a presentation that we would like certainly to give perhaps at our next meeting, that really emphasizes what we have done, at least the Harbor Commission has done, to preserve the quality of waterfront property and marine development in our area here.
Yeah, I think that's the presentation we saw at the meeting that.
It's simply been modified, but again, I think it would be important for the committee members to perhaps, again, see what what has been developed and what has gone forward so far. Put things.
It might be easier just to send the link to that.
Yeah, we can do that. I can send that. We can send that as well. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think it's great to have that grounding and some of what's happened so far, and we certainly appreciate hearing from the commission sort of leading into this the steering committee meeting. I think one of the things that's sort of a perennial challenge is even if you've addressed an issue once, as time passes, you need to return to it, right? Because the context shifts, the market shifts, the issues,
Yes.
the pressure points
Yeah.
shift. So I think it's sort of validation that this is likely to be a perennial, balance that Norwalk has to, observe and maintain sort of actively. And so that's part of what we're kind of here to do with you, is sort of revisit it in the right way and keep it
I've
going
been doing
forward.
waterfront planning for a long time, and not maybe as as long as the Johns, but the market's always circling like vultures. Huh?
Well, exactly. That's exactly it.
I don't tell my developer friends that, but policy, including land use policy, is what cities do to keep the market from doing what it actually wants to do.
Well, when you're dealing with
simple definition here,
you're dealing with a number of boaters that pay a lot of taxes and a lot of money in and around the harbor, and you have no facilities for them to work with, or no services, and you're gonna have a major problem. So you can have a boat there, but if you can't pull it out of the water, if you can't store it, you can't maintain it. I like to see what the boating population is going to look like if that ever happens. It's happening in Stanford.
I wanted to maybe I think this is a great conversation. I wanted to just, because Water Street is sort of one portion of the study area, I wanted to just sort of flag for anybody else, if there's any other sort of focal points that you'd like to sort of talk about or point out for us as we're looking at this.
Yeah, would it be best, Steve? Steve Kleppen, should I send it to you or to Lieutenant Michelle, and let Michelle send out that is the series of newspaper articles that we have that date back to 1988, 1987, dealing with the rezoning issue that was dealing with the Marine Commercial District, as well as the overview that the commission has put together for the benefit of the committee.
You can send it to either Michelle or I, and it'll get there either way.
All right, we'll do that.
Zoe, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to suggest, I saw you were trying to speak. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. I think John has some great points. Water dependent use to me is a really important concept, and something I think Norwalk ought to preserve, because like he says, you can't, if you have a boat but you can't access the water, what good is it? And amenities that go along with that are very important, and it's part of what draws people to Norwalk.
Exactly.
One of my questions is, when you have the public meetings and public input, oftentimes it's the same 20% of the people that give you 80% of the feedback, and particularly developers are much more attuned with these issues than your average citizen. I just want to point out that in one of our other studies, and Steve Kleppen helped me with this, but the interactive questionnaire that was done, I think by TMP, it was a really good way for people to respond online. It was kind of interactive. You clicked an icon and you could say where you wanted a sidewalk or where you might need to have bike lanes. and it just made it easy to respond. It wasn't predetermined questions and you could leave a remark. So I'm just wondering what kind of questions or what type of interaction do you plan on offering to the public? And obviously, is it going to be disseminated, through these neighborhood email constant contact lists, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great
So-
question. So sorry, go ahead, Steve, you can start.
Oh, sure. Thanks. So we did, I think Zoe had put up the slide that showed the interactive map that we have, so that's still up and available. And Laura, I was going to ask Laura if you could kind of touch on who that went out to. And I know we sent it out to a big list, including this group. So if you could kind of jump in.
Sure. So I think it went out to all of the commissions through their representatives of the city. It went out to, we have a list of the neighborhood associations as well as, so kind of more formal neighborhood associations, but then also any religious groups email I could get. So I think there's something like 60 religious institutions in town. So it went out to all of them and we requested that they send out to their groups as well. It also went out to some of the kind of community focused nonprofits, such as the Women's Voters and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So we had a pretty big variety there. And then we also posted it on Facebook. So just in case there were people that either didn't get the email or we missed their network in some way, it's available on the Norwalk Facebook page, the Norwalk Tomorrow website. And then also I made a Nextdoor. It's a common kind of social media at the neighborhood level, and I posted on there as well. So this map is out. I think Zoe has it on the screen right now, and you can see all the little icons are the comments we've received to date. So we've had some great participation and also really productive participation too. Everyone's, bringing great ideas and being constructive and positive. So I'm really happy with the way this has turned out.
Was this one just for the transportation issues, not necessarily redevelopment type issues, for lack of a better term?
This is exclusively for the waterfront study. I'm unsure if the transportation department has one out that's similar for a study they're working on. But on this one, we've exclusively received comments as it falls within the study area. So it's a little bit darker.
So you actually, you can't make comments outside of it. So just to control expectations, because we are making recommendations within the study area. So people have, this forces people to stay within our boundaries in terms of what they're commenting on. But you can see there is a, variety. People have focused on different things. A lot of people are, offering ideas and suggestions. You can see the orange icons are sort of the dominant one that's showing up. And there's also been a lot of, people can sort of interact with each other's comments to some degree as well. But I think also this is sort of at this early stage, very broad in terms of it's basically offers people general comments, ideas and suggestions, things you like and things you dislike. So this is kind of a, first pass, but as we get closer to recommendations, we could, for instance, do a version of this map that's more targeted in terms of the way that it's, what kinds of comments it's asking for, that might get closer to what you're describing, Tammy, that's sort of about specific recommendations, specific projects that people have in mind. Yeah, certainly if you are able to track down the one that I think you referred to, the TMP
very
interactive.
similar. It's actually the same little icons and stuff. That's great.
Okay. It's probably the same service. I think it's called Social Pinpoint. So it's a common service that a lot of planners use because it's very handy.
Yeah, it's much more user friendly, I think, than some of the things we've done in the past. And I would just recommend to keep resending it. Somebody might have a comment, but they lost it in their email because they got 100 other emails the same day. So I'm happy to resend it out to my list.
Yeah, I was
That'd be
gonna
great.
say, maybe Laura and I will chat about it. That was one thing we were thinking after, like, we had the zoning charrette, we probably should. When we have these lists, I think we have a good list, and, you know, obviously could be expanded on, is just hammering it home a couple more times, you know, so
Yeah.
it's not just a one-off, because, you know, like you said, somebody gets an email, they said, oh, it looks like a good idea, and then they get distracted with home and their life and their job, and they forget about it, so it'd be good to send a second reminder out at some point in the near future.
Yeah, especially when there's already good stuff on it that people could look at.
Yeah. I would do it like periodically, Steve, until that April date or whatever it is, April 9th or whatever that date was.
Any other suggestions,
Yes,
thoughts,
this
comments?
is John Cuddy. I just might as well add another John to the list.
Yeah, jump right in.
A point of interest for me with this is the area on Water Street between Washington and Hanford Place. And I'm also, you know, agreeing with the Harbor Commission on marine use and so forth, but also agree that perhaps we can add other uses other than residential to better activate those areas. But particularly that area between Hanford and Washington Street on Water Street is something I think, you know, has a lot of potential, especially for his, you know, in direct in vicinity of what many consider the focal point of South Norwalk is Washington Street. And knowing that a lot of empty parcels are there are a lot of, I mean, a lot of transition, a lot of good things, let's say, that could happen there. So just wanted to say that that's, since this began, even prior to its conception, that's a focal point for me, especially. I think there's, like I said, a lot of room for a lot of potential there for some development, and just wanted to put that out there.
Great, thank you.
I mean, economically, our from the Harbor Commission's point of view, besides what's already been said, we want to see an expansion and a lot more economic opportunities come into South Norwalk to visit all the restaurants, the museums, more docks put in, more you know, paths to walk on along the waterside. All of these things are all positive things at the end of the day. And it will bring economic value to the city. To put in apartments, and we've all seen it, maybe we don't want to recognize it. The apartments that went in first were in the $1,900 to $2,200 range. Now those prices have doubled, and it's had a rippling effect. And if we're concerned about all our citizenry, it's rippled into what was the less expensive apartments are now tripled and quadrupled in value, and you're winding up with 2, 3, 4, 5 families overcrowding in single family houses because of it. That's the residual effect of all these apartments that are going up. So, I mean, we have to weight that into the whole equation as well.
Yeah, I think the residential housing markets are a complicated beast, and you know, I think that there's a lot of different sort of influences that are coming to a head in Norwalk. You know, including, you know, COVID exacerbating some of the sort of market pressures from folks in bigger cities moving. So I think there's a lot going on in the residential market, and certainly the focus of this plan is more so, you know, on the economic side of things. And so that's certainly going to be what we, you know, focus our efforts on. But of course, there's always a relationship between the housing and the sort of economic activity of a city. And so we'll kind of just be keeping an eye on that relationship so that we kind of hopefully create a sort of mutually beneficial dynamic between the two of them. But it's always a challenge.
Yeah, and because residential is the highest and best use and is driving land values in Norwalk beyond any other use, I think at this point in the plan, it doesn't make that you can't open the barn door because then the land values go up. But I think other uses, restaurants, you know, fixed to maximum square footages probably, so it's not the Trojan horse for a giant destination restaurant, but those are going to have much less of an impact on land value than allowing residential would, and would keep property values preserved and stabilized, but would provide other economic activity for individual property owners, but collectively for the backside of those businesses along the waterfront that could capitalize on the housing across the street. Like, so I think there might be some economic development synergies there, and there's a kind of sweet spot probably. I think that's something that we discussed just a couple of minutes ago. But things like restaurants don't drive land values, but allowing market rate residential does.
Right. I'm going to chime back in, and there are renderings that have been drafted, and I've seen them. They're going back a few years, but I believe, Steve, you've seen them as well. And I'm going back to the area I spoke about earlier, where there were such uses as public boardwalks, just public space. It was there were a lot of ideas there. And has there been any thought into perhaps looking at Water Street but just a portion of it, and recommending specific zoning just for an area, like a smaller area versus the entire length of Water Street?
I think the short answer is we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit too early for us to think about, like, the next step of this process, by the way, is to do some alternative scenarios, but within a range that we already think makes sense from a land value, economic development, preservation of water dependent uses category. But there's probably some feathered scenarios that go from here to here that we'll be bringing back to discuss, the consequences of those. And so there might be a give it a little bit scheme, or full preservation, but with some accessory uses scheme. I'm literally starting to think about what they might be right now based already on the feedback we've gotten and where this conversation has gone. But we'll definitely be bringing back scenarios before anybody decides anything.
Okay, great. So it's early in the process then.
Yeah.
Okay.
This will be kind of a relatively fast moving process though, so we'll jump into it pretty quickly. So kind of it's not too far down the line. And also I realize, in the interest of time, we're getting pretty close to our sort of 6:30 mark. So I wanted to just, I'm going to stop sharing the map here and jump back in to just share some of the next steps. And then I believe we are going to open up for public comment as well. So we're probably right up against our end mark here. So just a moment. And certainly this, are you guys seeing the purple slide saying next steps?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So just as sort of a reminder, returning to the schedule, we're coming up on scenarios pretty quickly. So we're hoping to share some initial ideas with you guys to sort of workshop them before the winter holidays, if possible. So we'll we're going to move at a pretty quick clip here to try and make sure that we can wrap this whole process up in time for it to be in sync with the broader comprehensive rezoning effort for the city, so that these recommendations can be folded in. What we have to do between now and then, and this is stuff that we've sort of started already but haven't shared back with this group, we're doing sort of initial document review. This includes, of course, the harbor management plan, along with several other kind of local plans at the city level, some of the state policies to make sure that we sort of are prepared with the alignments there. And also some of the data that we've been made aware of about water quality from Harbor Watch and Dick Harris. We're also working with our economic development subconsultant to sort of do some due diligence on some of the sort of the questions or ideas that have come up through the stakeholder engagement, in particular around the sort of water dependent industrial uses, water dependent commercial uses in terms of economic impact, and then also doing a little bit more sort of digging on environmental and ecological factors that might ultimately make their way into some of our policy recommendations and sort of capital project recommendations. And then finally, you kind of heard Tim talking about it just a few moments ago. What those are really in service of is us coming up with some scenarios to workshop with you guys. So when we come back for hopefully the sort of December steering committee meeting, and we'll circle back to scheduling in just a second, is sort of sharing some initial ideas with you and really workshopping them together. And then what we sort of coming off of that discussion with you all, we'll sort of make some revisions to those scenarios and then share them out to the public. So that's kind of the immediate next step. And that brings us to scheduling. So the holidays are a busy time. And so we wanted to sort of just take the temperature of everyone who's here, whether any of these dates are completely not workable, if any of them have a lot of potential to gather a critical mass of you all. So if we can just do maybe I'm trying to think of the best sort of mechanism to get this feedback. We can just go through them sequentially and see if we have anybody who can't join us. So if you are able to attend, you can stay quiet. We'll assume that you are able to join us, and then we'll do a follow-up to sort of confirm this, but I just want to get a sort of hot, cold temperature on these dates. So December 1st, that's a Wednesday, from 6 to 8. Anybody unable to attend at that time? Okay, so that'll be a candidate. December 9th, that's a Thursday, from 6 to 8 p.m.
I cannot do that.
I can't do that date either.
This is an efficient way to do it, Zoe. It's the old-fashioned way. Scheduling a meeting. No pool, no Google poll or long email thing.
December 14th, that's a Tuesday, like tonight, from 6 to 8 p.m.
I can't do that. I'll have a council meeting that night.
Okay, and then the last option, getting close to Christmas, Tuesday, December 21st, from 5 to 7. That's a Tuesday, so it's the Tuesday of the week before Christmas.
Fine with me.
I can't do that one either. It's Sabrina.
Okay. All right, perfect. We will circle back with you to confirm, but that's really helpful just to get a sort of general sense of what our preferred dates might be. So with that, I think I'll close out and we can transition to public comment. I think all of you already, correspond with Steve, Laura, and Michelle relatively regularly, but they're the best people to reach out to sort of with ongoing things. They might pull us in if it makes sense to do so, but we'll definitely be working with you closely going forward, and are really excited to kind of get into the details with you over the next couple months and start to get some increased public feedback on it as well. Yeah, that's it for now. Any last sort of urgent comments before we transition to public comment? Okay, really appreciate all of your time. I know this is not, for some of you, perhaps this is an exciting Tuesday night activity, but I know for many this is sort of a duty. So we appreciate your participation and your time. And for the city team, do you want to run the public comment process? I don't know if you have any attendees who listened in.
Sure. It looks like we have one person from the public on, Diane CC. I guess just raise your hand if you'd like to speak and then we'll bring you over.
I don't know, maybe Zoe could stop the share, maybe.
Yep, can do.
I don't think we have any takers.
Yeah, I don't think so.
We just, wowed them into silence. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap then. We'll be reaching out to you shortly to formally schedule our meeting in December. Since looks like December 1st was our preferred one, that's coming up real quick. So we'll turn this around pretty quickly for you. And we'll start having some more specific discussions about alternatives and sort of different scenarios that we might want to share back out to the public.
Don't forget, Zoe, there's Thanksgiving in between. Just
Guess I don't have a holiday. We'll make quick work of it. Might be a little less developed than if we had done a later December meeting, but we'll get it done. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Nice seeing
Zoe.
everyone again.